Welcome to today's webinar, How to Block Network Threats at Massive Scale Using Threat Intelligence Gateways. Today's webinar is brought to you by Bandura Cyber, the company that pioneered the Threat Intelligence Gateway. My name is Holger Schulze. I am the founder and CEO of Cybersecurity Insiders, the online community for cybersecurity professionals, and I'll be your moderator today. Now it is my pleasure to welcome our featured presenters. First, I'd like to welcome Todd Weller. Todd is Chief Strategy Officer at Bandura. Welcome, Todd. Next, I'd like to welcome Raz Ganagunian, and Raz is a cyber risk consultant at AIG. Welcome, Raz.
Thanks, Holger.
Oh, thank you both for presenting today. All right, let's take a quick look at today's agenda. First, we will review the key findings of the recent research report on threat intelligence. After reviewing the state of threat intelligence, Raz will dive deeper into the current threat landscape and how organizations can better protect themselves against cyber risks. Finally, Todd will tell us about threat intelligence gateways. What are they? Why do we need them? And how they can be deployed, right, to block network threats at scale. Now, let's take a quick look at the threat intelligence report. And, threat intelligence has become a crucial weapon, right, if you will, in the fight against cybersecurity threats. And a large majority of organizations have made it a key part of their security programs. Now, one of the first questions we asked in the survey was, how important is threat intelligence to your organization's security posture? And the responses clearly show that threat intelligence is not just a nice to have capability, right, for organizations anymore. It has become a vital part of robust cybersecurity programs. A large majority of respondents, about 8 out of 10, say that threat intelligence is very important to extremely important to their organization's security posture. And that, by the way, is one of the highest grades for any security domain that we have surveyed in 2018. Next, we asked our survey participants, how do you use threat intelligence data? Not surprisingly, organizations are leveraging their cyber threat intelligence data for a number of use cases. Easily the most common use case is detecting threats and attacks, right? Cited by 58% of the respondents. And other scenarios here include incident response, vulnerability management, blocking threats, blocking domains, right, malicious domains or IP addresses, at egress points, right, such as firewalls and threat intelligence gateways. Bottom line, threat intelligence is core to cyber defense. Now, before I go any further, let me pause here and Todd, let me ask you, does this align with what you're seeing out there?
Yes, Holger, absolutely. I think, first of all, threat intelligence has shifted from a nice to have to becoming more critical component of cyber defense. You'll see later we'll talk about, it's becoming more important not only to use it, but to share it. Frameworks like the NIST cybersecurity framework, are increasing the focus there. And then the other data point here, which I think is valid, is it has been focused heavily on detection and response. And one of the key trends we're starting to see now is threat intelligence moving more into a prevention focus, more proactively using threat intelligence. And that's what a threat intelligence gateway helps with. So this foots with what we're seeing in the market.
That's exactly right. Thank you, Todd. On that note, the barrage, the just pure number and severity of threats, that can obviously overwhelm many systems, right, and SOC teams. And let's face it, in today's IT organizations, there's simply not enough security people to manually act on threat intelligence, fast enough. Which brings us to our next survey findings, where we looked at the key challenges, right, faced by security teams. And easily the most common challenge organizations tell us about is lack of resources, right? Lack of resources to analyze the collected threat data, right, and act on the intelligence. And this data point crystallizes the need for automation, right, and for intelligent, scalable solutions. Next, I'd like to ask Raz to share with us his perspective. Raz, what are you seeing in terms of what's going on in the real world, right, when it comes to cyber threats, and what can companies do about it?
Sure, thanks, Holger. So first off, I like to just talk about the growing threat landscape here. And as you can see on this chart, basically the message we want to get across is the number of internet-connected devices is greatly outpacing our ability to properly secure it. So we can see there year-over-year trending in 2022, we have about 200 billion connected devices, 96 zettabytes of data online. So for those of you who don't know what a zettabyte is, that 96 zettabyte is like giving every person on the face of this planet a 7 terabyte hard drive, which is a lot of data. So cybercrime is also costing over $1 trillion annually, over 300 billion passwords to protect. So there's a lot of different things that we're concerned with, especially in the near future. Next slide, please. So we see here these some scary numbers here. Cyber extortion being the #1 security issue that clients are dealing with. So cyber extortion, whether it's we're dealing with ransomware or an attacker has a client's data and they're threatening to expose it or leak it unless a payment has been made, or whether an attacker is threatening to do a denial of service attack on a particular client unless a payment has been made. Less than a third of organizations claim to be prepared. So when it comes to cyber breach response, preparation is absolutely key in preparing for a cyber breach. And things like conducting a tabletop exercise greatly helps in that preparation phase of an incident response lifecycle. Employees continue to be the weakest link in the security program. We've seen this over and over again. Typically, attackers get a foothold in the client environment by sending some sort of a phishing email in which a client opens it up, and then the compromise occurs after that. Next slide, please. So some of the trends that we've seen, the Internet of Things and the industrial IoT. So the number of online devices projected to grow 40 billion by 2021. These include cameras, smart TVs, refrigerators, cars, and yes, even fish tanks. The IoT devices are typically difficult to secure and patch, and the attackers are leveraging these weaknesses to launch various attacks, including disruption of the critical infrastructure and other devices that are more heavily relying on industrial Internet of Things devices for operations. So examples of those type of sectors would be manufacturing, refinery, mining, etc. Denial of service attacks, we've seen this increasing, causing more harm than just denying access to a website. So DDoS attack services are easily and readily available on the dark web, could be purchased as a service, costing very little and capable of disrupting many, many different targets. Cyber extortion, as I mentioned earlier, ransomware continues to grow at an alarming rate, costed over $3 billion in the last 3 years. Social engineering, growth of 500%. Cyber warfare, there was just a recent article that came out that mentioned the Department of Homeland Security officials stating that Russian hackers have already reached U.S. utility control rooms. Unsecured cloud storage, we've seen an increase in this and unprotected public cloud storage incidents, troves of data being publicly exposed. So the solution here is just take care in properly securing that stored data. I provided 2 examples there. Amazon Web Services bucket exposes 50 gigabytes of Capital One data. So they got exposed via an unsecured Amazon storage unit there. And the same thing happened to FedEx. Next slide, please. Supply chain. So we're seeing an increase in incidences related to that. So third-party supply chain cyber risk can affect even the largest companies that spend many millions of dollars a year on cyber and yet can still be exposed by a vendor that mishandles their data. I provided an example of this where a firm that did some work for some different car manufacturers like GM, Toyota, and Tesla, basically they had a cybersecurity incident and the corporate documents, including detailed blueprints and factory schematics, were exposed. So even though those car manufacturers did their due diligence, spent a lot of money on controls to protect their assets, the partner that they were dealing with, unfortunately, was not that secure and a breach was exposed in that respect. Crypto exchange breaches and crypto miners. So we're seeing an increase in these types of breaches. So cryptocurrency exchange breaches the growing number of vulnerabilities exposed in various cryptocurrencies and insecurely configured cryptocurrency wallets, resulting in loss of millions. The rise in crypto miners distributed and installed on compromised victims to mine for cryptocurrencies. So we've seen an uptick in the type of incidents as it relates to crypto miners. Attackers are seeing this as a very lucrative business and way to generate a lot of income for them, because these miners are essentially mining for cryptocurrencies like Bitcoins and others, in that way to get more income. The dark web and threat intelligence. So more organizations are proactively using dark web threat intel to continually monitor the dark web for any data or any accounts that may have been compromised from their systems. So compromised data such as credit card holder data, sensitive personal information, and personal health information are typically found, sold, and traded in dark web forums, along with access to thousands of compromised sites. And lastly, insider threats. So we've seen an uptick on this. Employees uploading, sharing company data using public cloud-based services, transferring company data to unencrypted and unauthorized USB devices, and accessing personal email accounts from their company workstations. Disgruntled employee example there, an example where Tesla sued a former employee for hacking and stealing confidential data. And the employee essentially admitted to hacking Tesla's manufacturing operating system and transferring data out of the organization. Next slide, please. So what can organizations do? Well, there's quite a different, many things. So cyber resiliency requires a defense in depth approach. So there's not one particular solution that's going to solve all the problems. You need a good cybersecurity governance framework in place, implement a cybersecurity incident response plan and incident response team, end user security awareness training, very, very important. Threat intelligence detection and prevention, something that Bandura with their Polywall threat intelligence gateway can help with. Having good and current data backups and testing your restore process. So when the event of a ransomware incident, one of the best things to have after that is some good backups so that you're able to restore it. Network segmentation, DDoS protection, cloud security, patch management, very, very important to be able to patch devices in a timely manner. Endpoint threat detection and response. Hardening your systems, vulnerability scanning, penetration testing, identity and access management, so two-factor authentication in some cases, encryption, very important, especially when it comes to sensitive personal information, credit card data, and data loss prevention. So we've actually, AIG has partnered with Bandura, and all our cyber insured clients with specific premium threshold amount are eligible to receive a free threat intelligence gateway appliance offered by Bandura. We believe Bandura is a leader in this space in providing threat intelligence services, and that's our partnership with Bandura. And with that, Holger, I'll pass that over to you.
Excellent, thank you, Raz. You already mentioned Bandura. Let's take a look at this innovative technology, threat intelligence gateways, right, and how they can help organizations strengthen their threat defenses. Todd, you want to tell us more about threat intelligence gateways?
Absolutely. Thanks, Holger, and thanks, Raz. I think some very interesting information, and you'll see some of these themes are validated by what we're seeing. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Todd Weller. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer of Bandura Cyber. From a background perspective, I spent 17 years as a Wall Street research analyst covering cybersecurity, and have spent the last 4+ years working on the vendor side with cybersecurity technology providers. So today we're going to go through, the why, the what, the how with respect to threat intelligence gateways. And as Holger mentioned, I always think it's important to look at how customers and organizations are using the technology to improve their cyber defenses. Use cases are, I think, critical. So let's first talk about the problem. And I think, we've addressed this at a high level already. And one of the common themes we see here is security has a scale problem. In fact, there's multiple scale problems across multiple dimensions. The first is really the volume of threats. Everything Raz just went through, right? Just the volume of known threats, unwanted traffic out there today is just massive. And with things like the Internet of Things, it's going to continue to grow. So more vectors, more threats, just the volume of new malicious IPs every day, the volume of malicious domains, 30 to 50 million at any one moment, and a continuation of spam and phishing attacks. It's just a very high volume that we're all dealing with. The second scale problem is a bit of a mismatch, and Holger talked about it in the data. It's the security skill shortage. It's the workforce shortage. And, over time, there'll be moves to make this get better, but right now it's a problem. And you can see from this data from Enterprise Strategy Group, more companies are finding this problematic. So with educational changes and more training and more platforms like Cybersecurity that exist out there, that's going to help long term. But I think Holger mentioned as well, automation is important as well to scale your security staff. And one thing that's becoming clear is that automation is required because attackers are using automation to attack. And so therefore, for us as defenders, it's increasingly becoming a requirement. The third scale problem is around existing security tools. On the network security side, what we find is limited ability to utilize threat intelligence, external threat intelligence in particular, tough to integrate into those systems and to enable automation. Manageability has always been a challenge. I find it very few folks I've talked to enjoy managing firewall rules and access control lists. It's a necessity, but it's not necessarily fun. And what we're seeing is that with the scale problem of threats, that throwing more deep packet inspection processing cycles at it is not a cheap endeavor. So the importance of this slide is that the scale of the security problem, the lack of security staff, the limitations with tools, we're not alone, right? There's a lot of attackers out there. They're banding together. We're all under a lot of pressure, and we can't do it alone. And so I think from that perspective, there's a significant amount of threat intelligence out there that on a collective basis, organizations can use and share to help us improve cyber defenses. So today, now more than ever, there's a significant amount of threat intelligence that's easily accessible, widely available across a range of sources. There's a lot of commercial threat feeds that are out there. There's a significant volume of open source threat intelligence. There's threat intelligence you can get access to from the government, like the Department of Homeland Security CISP feed. And I think in the last 5 years or so, we've seen increasing adoption and use of industry threat intelligence, mostly driven by information, security analysis, information sharing analysis centers. 20 plus of those exist today. Financial services, you have the FSISAC, energy, EISAC, and many more. And these organizations are providing actionable threat intelligence, a place for industry specific folks to share and to get that context. And we're also seeing early signs too of more cross industry efforts here. Organizations like the Global Resilience Federation looking to drive cross sector intelligence sharing. So there's a lot of threat intelligence out there. We talked about earlier, using this and sharing it. It's becoming more critical. You're seeing it in this cybersecurity framework. I think it's going to become a more prescriptive part of compliance regulations going forward. In the financial industry, we're all already seeing signs that IT examiners for the banks are increasingly looking and wanting to see financial services firms using threat intelligence and using the FSISAC feed. And I think that trend's going to continue. So there's a lot of threat intelligence, but there's problems on this side of the equation too. The first is threat intelligence has traditionally been the domain of larger enterprises, those with significant resources to operationalize it. And resources in this case is not only dollars, but more importantly, the staff. It's the bigger enterprises that have armies of security folks, sophisticated security operations. The challenge is organizations of all sizes, need access to threat intelligence. Attackers don't discriminate based on company size. Everybody has the same risk, but small and mid-sized organizations face more severe resource pressures, both dollars and people. And of course, everybody has a time issue. So from this perspective, even the larger enterprises are facing challenges around how do I access threat intelligence and how do I do this so that it's easy efficient and doesn't cost a lot? How do I manage multiple threat feeds that are coming in different formats? And more importantly, how can I take that intelligence and put it to work to protect my network? Threat intelligence is great, but if you can't do anything with it, if you can't take action, then it kind of begs the question, what's the point? Another dimension to the problem is being able to operationalize and make use of that threat intelligence, as I just mentioned. And again, looking at existing infrastructure like next generation firewalls, they are very good at what they do from a deep packet inspection perspective, but they have limited ability to process external threat intelligence. So the best firewalls can utilize 30,000 to 300,000 external threat intelligence indicators. So what you'll find in a sea of security marketing is every security vendor markets intelligence, but oftentimes that solution is biased to the vendor's own intelligence. And, again, threat intelligence is becoming critical. We've talked about the scale of threats, the scale of the problems, and there's all this intelligence out there, but, being able to use only a subset, a few 100,000 indicators, pales in comparison to the scale of known threats that we're out there battling every day. The final problem, from a significant problem perspective we see in the threat intelligence space, is the use has been too reactive versus proactive. The most common use case we see is that threat intelligence is integrated into SIM systems, really there to enhance security monitoring efforts, detection efforts, and or provide context for investigations. And what we're seeing is this shift where it's becoming more critical to use this threat intelligence more proactively, use it to prevent threats, to not be as reactive. Again, we come back to a circular problem here in that many organizations are limited in their ability to do that at the scale required because existing security controls don't have the capacity to let you use it at the scale you need. So this leads into threat intelligence gateway technology. It's a newer emerging area of security technology. It's been gaining significant momentum over the last 12 months. Late last year, Gartner validated the space, defined the space. And if you look at their key terms, it's a standalone network detection and threat mitigation solution that uses large numbers, massive volumes of threat indicators for blocking and for detection. And it does this in a fast way. An important point here is that TIGs, as we call them, they don't replace the firewall. They complement the firewall and they benefit the firewall. And TIGs are really being viewed as letting you more effectively and efficiently block this massive volume of known threats, the known noisy threats, letting your firewall become more efficient by, getting that noise reduced, focusing on cleaner traffic. So threat intelligence gateway technology is, emerging. I find it to be very interesting in my 20 years of looking at this industry. I think it's a very unique technology in that TIGs sit at the intersection of network security and threat intelligence. And as you know, in some larger organizations, those can be in two different worlds where threat intelligence is done by the security operations center and the security analyst, and you have network security with either a dedicated group or being run out of the networking group, or some combination thereof. I think what you're going to find is by sitting at the intersection of network security and threat intelligence that there's a lot of versatility and powerful use cases that threat intelligence gateways address. From a Bandura perspective, Bandura's been around since 2013. We pioneered threat intelligence gateway or TIG technology. The work was done in part through efforts with the U.S. Department of Defense. And just a little history, the initial use case was the DoD wanted to be able to turn on and off massive volumes of IPs for military and civilian workers. And we're looking for a way to do that at massive scale. And from there, use cases evolved to how can I do that to allow or deny traffic from countries, which is GeoIP filtering, and then evolved to doing that with threat intelligence indicators. If you look at the core technology behind the Bandura TIG, it really revolves around layer 2-3 filtering of IPs and domains, and it's being done at massive scale. and it's being done in software. So not, doesn't require specialized hardware, and it's fast and with virtually no latency. What's interesting is this is like the engine that drives the technology, but around the engine is a complete solution that really, again, I think creates a versatile weapon for cyber defense. I find the best way to frame the power of the TIG technology is around what we call the 4 A's. And, I'll tell you, the TIG solution covers all these A's, and many customers like the full suite of capabilities, but you'll also find certain customers may value, certain A's more than another. And we'll talk about that briefly. But from a 4A perspective, the first A is access to millions of out-of-the-box threat indicators. So you get more threat intelligence from a TIG than you will get out of a next-gen firewall, a unified threat management solution. It's coming from multiple sources. It's not just, one vendor's own view of threat intelligence. And those sources are spanning commercial, open source, industry, and government. And it's multiple types, whether that's reputation feeds, which are constantly changing scoring of threats, blacklists. And then, it's important also to know where is this coming from and who is it coming from an organizational perspective, because the combination of reputation and threat intelligence with the where and the who provides for some powerful filtering capabilities. The second A is aggregation. So, again, going back to the management challenges, one of the cool things that the TIG provides is the ability to consolidate multiple threat feeds into a common place. So when you look at a Bandura TIG, while we have multiple IP reputation feeds coming in, those are all consolidated into a single feed, a common scoring system across common categories. And while we're providing threat intelligence out of the box and aggregating for you, it's also very important that you make it easy for organizations to bring their own threat intelligence. And that's one of the powerful attributes of this platform is the open nature of it. Bring your own threat intelligence, whether it's via plugins that are written or standards like Stix and Taxi. It's very easy to bring in your own threat intelligence. And then, the more intelligence you can bring in, then you can apply analytics, right, to see what's going across, different aspects of threat intelligence. The third A is automation. We've talked about that multiple times today. It's becoming more critical in order to scale security staff. Getting rid of as many manual workflows as possible, those workflows that are bogging down staff. And from a threat intelligence perspective, having to keep feeds updated, getting a spreadsheet or updating something in a firewall is challenging. And these feeds are updated in real time. And that's important, right? Because reputation or an IP might be bad today, but in a few hours, it might be good. And so there's constant change that's needed to keep up with, the dynamic nature of threats. And then, automation as far as policies being applied, no updating of firewall rules. And then finally, and this is the last but not least, you have to have the ability to act. And there's a lot of threat intelligence feeds, there's threat intelligence platforms, and what a lot of those are limited is you can't do anything with it. You can't take action. And one of the powerful features of a TIG is bringing that action, whether that's blocking known threats, whether that's a detection use case and alerting at the SIM. And, again, speaking to the theme of automation, the ability to automatically respond based on threat indicators coming from other systems. TIGs from a deployment perspective, where you see organizations put them in the network, is typically at key internet ingress egress points. The TIG will most commonly be deployed ahead of the firewall. It serves as a first and a last line of defense, really as a shield against the massive volume of known and unwanted traffic trying to come inbound to corporate networks. And then a last line of defense, in the case that, breaches happen, something gets in, trying to block that and stop it before, sensitive data exfiltration takes place. I will tell you that this is the most common deployment for a TIG, although there are other deployments. So for example, there are use cases to deploy the TIG behind the firewall. In this, I would view that as more analogous as to an intrusion prevention system type deployment. When you look at TIGs, and Holger talked about this, and Raz did as well, defense in depth, right? It's critical. There are no silver bullets in security. You need multiple tools. The tools have to work together. Integration's important, and TIGs fit in. TIGs are another layer of security, another layer of protection for you. They're non-disruptive, doesn't require changes in your network, and TIGs integrate well with your other solutions. So very complementary. A question we often get a lot is, well, doesn't my firewall do this? And again, we've talked about the limitations, and TIGs solve that problem. We filter network traffic based on threat intelligence at a scale no firewall can do. Does that mean you don't need a firewall? No. Firewalls perform a very good function. Deep packet inspection. TIGs don't do deep packet inspection. We're not digging deep into the packet, looking for snort signatures, doing IPS or URL filtering, or ripping a file off the wire and sending that to a sandbox to do a behavioral analysis. So it's just a different approach. Complement secure DNS or secure web gateway as well. There's a little bit of overlap in that we're both focused. There's a focus on outbound, although again with a TIG is looking at inbound and outbound, and DNS is important, but TIGs use a broader view of threat intelligence to inform allow or deny policy. And then TIGs are very complementary to solutions that security use from a SOC perspective, from the SIM providing threat intelligence context, from a threat intelligence platform perspective, providing the action piece. And frankly, these spaces are kind of, I say, munging together, with SOC tools. But the point is, it helps put action. TIGs help provide the action piece here. They also provide visibility. And if you're using threat intelligence solutions, it enables you to get an increased ROI because you're doing something with that intelligence. So let's look at how organizations are deploying these real world use cases to get a sense of how companies are deploying TIGs to better protect their networks. So the first one is we call threat intelligence protection. That's another layer of security based on threat intelligence. Here we see mostly small, mid-sized businesses. This is solving the problem of they need access to threat intel, but they don't have the army of staff to manage, maintain it, and put it into action. And so from a threat intelligence gateway perspective, the play here is really it's significant threat intelligence driven protection out of the box. And it's easy to consume, automated, affordable. Sometimes I refer to it as threat intelligence in a box, but here it's really democratizing threat intelligence, bringing it to companies of all sizes. Here's an example: is a state bank that is deploying TIGs. They have 7 locations. They're deploying Fortinet firewalls there, and they're shielding those, front-ending those with the TIG to add another layer of security and improve their defense. Second use case, threat feed aggregation and automation. And here this speaks to the problem of managing, maintaining multiple threat feeds. And I'm telling you, it doesn't take many. If you're doing 100 threat intelligence sources, you're likely going to have a threat intelligence platform. But even dealing with the few, we see customers all the time that are using just an FS-ISAC feed, or if you're state and local, an MS-ISAC feed. And it's a challenge for them. So with a TIG, what the TIG can solve here is really that aggregation and automation, making sure those feeds are up to date, alleviating manual workflows. And again, these are examples here. County government, is using TIG not only as another layer of defense, but using that to automate the ingestion of the MS-ISAC feed and to take action. And another regional bank that's using it with an FS-ISAC feed. And this bank also indicated again that FFIEC compliance in the banking industry, that the bank examiners it believes it's getting better grades because it is using threat intelligence, it's using a threat intelligence gateway, and it's consuming and taking action based on their FS-ISAC feed. Use case here is operationalizing threat intelligence. Here we get into larger, more sophisticated security operations. Here they're using a lot of external threat intelligence, and the biggest challenge they're facing is how can I put it to work? How can I put TI into action to protect my network. And what they're looking to do here is, either proactively block network threats with threat intelligence ahead of the firewall, and/or, use TIG and that threat intelligence to give you more network visibility into what's coming in or trying to get in and out of your network using large volumes of threat intelligence. Two examples here: large energy company, they're using Anomaly threat stream for their threat intelligence and threat intelligence platform. And again, here they want to be able to see, based on that intelligence, what types of threats are trying to enter and exit, and wanting the ability to do policy-based blocking. They also happen to be consolidating GeoIP filtering through the TIG as well, because it's just easier to do it than it is in their firewalls. Another example, very large bank. Problem they're facing is their online banking application is being hit by a lot of unwanted traffic, a high volume of scans and probes. They're worried about account takeover. They have their own threat intelligence. So going back to those 4 A's, they're not really, they don't care as much about having access to threat intelligence or, necessarily aggregating it. They have their own threat intelligence. They have just a lot, right? 10 million plus indicators that they want to block on ahead of their online banking application. And they need to look for technology to help them do that, because you can't do it in your next generation firewall. The last use case I'm going to talk about, and we've hit on this a bit, but we're seeing this more as a trend, is really an appreciation that firewalls are becoming overloaded, right? We all know that firewall performance figures, as soon as you turn on intrusion prevention, your throughput drops by 50% or more, right? And when you turn on all the threat prevention capabilities, that 10 gigabit of firewall throughput is 2 gigabits of threat protection throughput. So the problem that is resonating and people are seeing is there's just a massive volume of threats. It's pounding the networks in the firewalls. You'd love to use threat intelligence to block it, but you can't in your firewall because you can only use a limited subset. So in that case, you either use a limited subset and have to curate threat intelligence and hope you got the right intelligence and face the risk of coverage gaps, or you solve the problem by throwing expensive deep packet inspection, upgrading that firewall horsepower. So here we're seeing organizations appreciate that adding a TIG into the mix ahead of the firewall is really helpful. It helps them more effectively block known threats. We've seen evidence of traffic reductions north of 70% as far as the load on the firewall, and that flows downstream. It means your firewall can focus on cleaner traffic. The effectiveness of that deep packet inspection can be better. There's less alerts you're having to deal with, less firewall manual log review, and less alerts overall. And again, the performance of your firewall gets better. You don't need to spend as much on horsepower and deferring upgrades as well. So this is a use case that we're seeing a lot more interest here with the TIG kind of shielding the firewall and helping the firewall perform better and do what it's supposed to be doing. So from a benefits perspective, I think you saw TIGs are a real versatile tool. It's another layer of defense. It's using threat intelligence is becoming more critical. It's becoming, a greater requirement of various frameworks, and it's really necessary to reduce risk. So a TIG helps you do that. And flow through benefits from that is if you're more effectively blocking known threats, you're reducing all the alert noise. And that's a challenge we're all dealing with. And so quiet down the firewalls and the SIMs. And if you quiet down the alerts, even some percent, it makes your staff better, right? It reduces the burden on them. That's fewer alerts they have to wade through. There's less manual work. Again, with the TIG, you don't have to be manually updating threat intelligence, manually updating firewall rules, access control lists. We've talked about the compliance. And the ROI to me is interesting because security has not really been historically an ROI kind of purchase. It's either been, I have to because some compliance or regulation makes me, or I have to, it's because it's just like insurance, right? I need to, but it's been hard from an ROI perspective. But I think one of the cool things about the TIG is it does have an ROI angle, particularly around, firewall performing better, deferring costs. And again, if you've already made investments in threat intelligence, you increase the ROI by being able to do something with it. And that TIG is also part of that orchestration and automation ecosystem. So from a summary perspective, I think, what you heard from all of us today is, there's a lot of threats out there, right? I mean, and there's scale problems we're all dealing with, whether it's the threat environment, it's the skill shortage, it's tool limitations. We saw in the data, we heard from Raz, threat intelligence, it's becoming more important. I hope you got the message and got to learn more about this newer area called TIGs today. And it's a very versatile technology. And what it's enabling is organizations of all sizes really to access, aggregate, automate, and act with threat intelligence. And what I also find to be very powerful is just the use cases of a TIG, in that a small mid-sized organization that might have one security person, or the IT person might be doing security, or might be a small team, can find significant value in a threat intelligence gateway. But so can the largest bank that has an army of security folks. And then lastly, TIGs are very much part of a defense in depth strategy. It's another layer, and it's going to complement and make your other solutions work better. So with that, I'll just point you to, if you want to check this technology out, you can get a free 30-day trial of Bandura TIG at that URL. And also there'll be an upcoming ebook on, your firewall's guide to war. And so if you want to sign up for that, there's the link there. And with that, Holger, let me turn it back to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Todd. Yeah, let's take a look at some of the live audience questions that are coming in. All right, Raz, I think this one's for you. As you and AIG see it, what are the most pressing, the most destructive cyber threats out there today? And, what should we be looking at for the future?
That's a great question, Holger. Thank you. So first, I just want to say, AIG being a leader in providing cyber insurance for over 20 years, we've seen multiple cyber claims. I can tell you with what we've seen in my experience as a senior incident response consultant and ethical hacker in my IBM days, that there is a continued focus on breach of your personal and financial information, operational loss, business interruption, and risk to critical infrastructure. I'll touch first on the mismanagement when it comes to safeguarding our personal and financial data. We've seen this with Equifax last year, and many others who, either from insecure cloud use or weakness in their web applications, have resulted in an enormous exposure and breach of personal and credit-related records. These type of exposures could have easily been avoided, just by patching and applying secure configurations and hardening practices. From a business interruption standpoint, let's take a look at the WannaCry and the NotPetya ransomware attacks that happened last year. Lots of organizations were impacted, huge loss. WannaCry was the first of its kind in that it exhibited worm-like behavior that spread very quickly to other Windows systems that weren't patched. The patch was available, but some organizations were just slow to implement it. So patch management is a very important part of any cyber resiliency program to ensure critical vulnerabilities are patched in a timely manner, which could have helped to mitigate against this type of an attack. Of course, patch management is just one of those controls that need to be in place. Lastly, I'll touch on critical infrastructure, as this is a very attractive target to many foreign adversaries, some of which may be state-sponsored. So according to the Department of Homeland Security, the attackers have already infiltrated some systems and have the ability to cause system damage by manipulating power grid, just as an example. Now more than ever, we're seeing an increased focus in ensuring our critical infrastructures are in step with security best practices and policies to avoid potentially catastrophic events that could impact our lives. Many successful breaches result from phishing campaigns, so I'd say just invest in cybersecurity awareness training platform to build that cyber aware culture within your organizations, as employees are typically the weakest link in the cyber chain. Now, I spoke earlier about different controls very briefly, but I'll just emphasize here having a good security governance framework, having an IR plan, testing it, patching and testing systems against vulnerabilities, encrypt sensitive data, have a good threat intel platform that's able to utilize many threat intelligence feeds and drop malicious traffic before it even reaches your other perimeter defenses. So great that, TIG is like the polywall, which Todd spoke to. It's a great solution that can help in this space. Overall, a good cyber resilience strategy is a multifaceted defense and in-depth approach that, if you practice that and implement it, would help an organization significantly reduce their risk and improve their cyber posture.
Excellent. Thank you, Raz. The next question, Todd, I think is for you. The question is, can you talk about how the shift to the cloud is impacting threat intelligence gateways?
No, that's a great question. I was actually on a panel today down in DC on cloud security, and cloud's having a big shift in IT from a threat intelligence gateway and broader network security perspective. You need to be able to protect networks, whether they are traditional corporate networks or whether they are virtual networks. That could be a virtual network on-prem that you're running in a VMware environment, or it could be virtual in respect to using public cloud environments like AWS, Microsoft Azure, and Google. And so I think it's, you have to be able to provide coverage across those deployment factors. So from our perspective, we're all software, and that makes it easy to, provide a threat intelligence gateway functionality in AWS, versus a dedicated appliance that's on your corporate perimeter. And I've definitely seen in network security with firewalls that there is a shift in the last year and a half to where more organizations are using multiple clouds. They're not just using AWS. They want to use AWS. They want to use Azure. They want to use Google. And they have hybrid workloads, and they need single pane of glass management, and they want consistency of policy management. And so while they're used to use native tools of the cloud platform, they're now looking to vendors like Bandura to provide, looking at their virtual solution. So so cloud is definitely having an impact. So you need to be able to protect across multiple environments, whether it's on-prem or cloud.
Thank you, Todd. The next question, false positive, can be an issue with threat intelligence. How do you look, to mitigate this issue, Todd?
Yeah, so false positives are unfortunately a fact of life, right? So you want to minimize them as well. So there's a couple angles to this. So one is, we from an out of the box perspective, partner with threat intelligence providers, companies like Webroot, Symantec, Proofpoint, and they have very large threat intelligence organizations, large sensor networks, and they put a lot of time and effort into accuracy of those feeds. And so in some respects, there's a dependency on the threat intelligence provider. We're also looking, internally all the time, what are we seeing? Are we seeing any issues? How can we help mitigate those? And then I'd say organizations themselves have their own view too of how to deal with that. So one of the features of the TIG, for example, is based on your view of risk, you can set thresholds for blocking. So if you deem that command and control at this moment in time is a bigger worry for you for various reason, you can block scores over 80 versus 90. So you're getting more aggressive in what you're blocking. So it's a combination of your intel is only as good as threat. What goes in is critical, right? So the threat intel provider, what we're doing on our end, and then the customer. It's a combined effort on that front.
Very good. There are a couple of questions about that input, right, into threat intelligence, and maybe we have time to tackle maybe two more questions. The first one regarding TIGs: is it necessary to consume the millions of threat indicators? For example, if I'm not in fintech, right, should I care about threats targeting fintech? Or if I'm not in retail, should I care about threats targeting retail? So the question is, should my interests and I guess my threat indicators be targeted at my specific market segment?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And so first of all, I think there's two angles to this. One is there are general threat intelligence sources, right, that are giving you kind of a horizontal view of the threat landscape. So for example, Webroot's IP reputation feed. At any time, there's 5 to 7 million IPs on that are across various categories with, various scores, indicating maliciousness. That really doesn't relate to whether it's a financial company or it's a retail company. It's threats that are out there that everybody needs to be aware of. So I think that's a critical layer. But the next layer is it's critical to have that industry context, right? So, if you are in, FSISAC, and if you're financial, you should be a part of FSISAC, and you should be contributing and, taking from the community as well, and using their threat intelligence. And then, I do think so many of these industries are intertwined today, right? I mean, you brought up a great example. Financial and retail are kind of intertwined, right? So stuff happening at a retail level could create financial fraud, or stuff happening at a financial level could create fraud at retail. So again, there's cross-industry efforts. Today was brought up at this event that there's government effort to get financial, energy, and I forget what the third industry was, to be working, telecom, to be working very closely together. So I think it's a mix, but I'd say the summary point is, the threat intelligence you're getting in your next generation firewall or your unified threat management is not good enough given the scale of today's threat environment.
Very good. Thanks, Todd. Yeah, let's tackle one more question. And the question is, can we use our own threat intelligence feed? For example, find an attacking IP or phishing IP and add it to the block list?
And the answer is yes. So I think, one of the critical aspects of our TIG, Bandura TIG, and should be any TIG, but I'm not sure they're all, I know they're not all as open, but you got to be an open platform. This system was built to be able to ingest threat intelligence from any source. So, we call it internally, bring your own threat intelligence, integrated in. And that could be a blacklist. It could be your own IP reputation feed. It could be a, IP blacklist from a SIM like Alien Vault with their open threat exchange, or it could be just based on the efforts you're doing, one atomic IP that you want to block for 24 hours. So there's ways to do all of that easily in our system, and it's easy for users to not only integrate their own threat intel, but for them to actually do it on their own through an easy to use interface.
Excellent. Thank you, Todd. All right, with that, we are at the finish line for today's session. Now, as we're closing this webinar, I'd like to thank all of you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed today's presentation. I would also like to thank Todd and Raz. Many thanks for sharing your insights on threat intelligence and how threat intelligence gateways can provide companies with more effective and scalable security defenses. Thank you both. Now, this concludes today's session. I hope we will see all of you again at one of our future webinars. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.